I have a question for you. Can you be a great guy but a terrible father? Let's find out. Hi folks, I'm Andrew and welcome back to my channel. Now the question we asked at the beginning of this video, can you be a great guy but a terrible father? Well, the answer is simply yes. And the reverse can also be true. You can be a great father but a terrible guy. The same thing with a woman. A woman can be a great mother but a terrible woman. Or a woman can be a terrible woman but a great mother. See, the variableness or the uniqueness of that is parenting is not an easy thing. You see, some of us make great parents, but terrible people. Now, some of us are great people, but we're terrible parents. Now, I want to explore in this video an example of what a terrible father is, and not just a terrible father, but also a great guy. In fact, this guy was so good that God said he was a man after his own heart. That's right, you guessed it. I'm talking about King David in the Bible. David was a warrior. David was someone who God called a man after his own heart. So obviously he had to be a great guy. But to see, the uniqueness of David is that not only was he a warrior, you know, he was in the army, he led the army, he was also a king, but David was also a psalmist. That means he wrote poems, he wrote music, he wrote psalms. So there was that tender side of David that no one really talks about a lot. But he was also a warrior. We know it from the battles he fought. From the first time he fought Goliath, we knew that David was a warrior. But when it came to parenting, well, David left a lot to be desired. I want to look at specifically the situation that happened with David's daughter, Tamar, and his son, Amnon. It's a unique situation and it's a confusing situation. But the first thing we must establish is the fact that they were half brothers and sister. So they were not from the same mother, although David was the father of both of them. But it's still a weird situation because when you read it, it's disturbing because here's a guy, Amnon, who has I would call it a lust towards his sister. He thought he was in love, but it's weird because it really was lust. We'll see that as we go along that it was really lust. But he had this feeling for his sister. And the story is found in 2 Samuel chapter 13. I have it here. Let's look at it. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David." So you see here, they don't have the same mother, but they were still brothers and sisters. Verse 2, Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shimei, David's brother. Now here's Amnon's uncle giving him some advice, which is terrible advice. So we see he was going in the wrong path from the beginning. He told David, in essence, he told David, look, you like this girl, right? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to play like you're ill, request that she come and make some cakes for you in your room, and then you will have your opportunity. Now, his uncle is giving him this advice. Now, talk about a weird family. This is it right here. That's a weird advice to give your nephew about his sister. He's trying to make up a way for him to actually get to sleep or have sex with his own sister. And so the story goes on where this whole plot unravels where Amnon pretends to be sick and he requests from the king, mind you, don't forget that, he requests from the king that his sister Tamar comes and bake cakes for him in his room. Let's look at verse 7, see what it says. David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. Now, I won't give David blame for this. I think he was innocent in all of this. He didn't see this coming. He didn't know. He probably didn't, obviously he didn't know the heart of his son Amnon. So this was a harmless suggestion. He said, go to your brother's room, he's ill. Go and bake some cakes for him or take some food to him. Let's go on. And so Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat it. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand. To me, that's suspicious right there. That's kind of weird. That's a weird request, but let's go on. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. What do you think about that? What goes through your mind when you read something like that? Is that part of your experience, or do you know anyone that's happened to? Because it's happened a lot in families. Let's go on. No, my brother, she said to him, don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you. But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than her, he raped her. You see what happened there? He raped her, his own sister. But the part I really want to get to is the way David responded to this whole thing. You see, up to this point, he didn't know anything what was going on. But let's see what happens when he finds out what happened. But before we get to David, here's another unique aspect of this story or this family dynamic. Absalom came to Tamar and noticed that she was crying, and he was asking her what happened. And she probably didn't say, and he said, this question to her was, did Amnon, your brother, do something to you? Or have you been with Amnon, your brother? Now, why would he ask that question? That's a weird question to even ask. Why was that even on his mind? I think that somewhere in this relationship, somewhere in this family dynamic, Amnon probably expressed how he felt about Tamar. And Absalom probably heard it, or someone told him about it, because that question just came out of the blue. Have you been with your brother Absalom, or did your brother Amnon lie with you? That was the question. Let's go on. And he told her in verse 20, be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. In other words, let's sweep this under the rug for now. Does that sound familiar? Let's sweep this under the rug for now. We don't want to deal with this. You see what happens when people don't deal with situations? He said, let's be quiet for now. You see, he also said that because he had a plan. There was something he knew he was going to do. Verse 20, he says, don't take this to heart. And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. Now here's where King David heard about it. When King David heard all of this, he was furious, and rightly so. And Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. Now, even though David was furious, you would find nowhere after the situation where he went and spoke to Amnon about this, he was angry, yes, but he did nothing about it. Because you know how we know this? The next verse, the very next verse says this: 2 years later, that means 2 years after this incident happened, David had still not spoken to his son about the situation. It's not recorded anywhere. Now, if he did, why didn't the Bible say it? It's not recorded anywhere that he dealt with this situation. Look at this verse. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. Now, what we have here in the preceding verses is Absalom is setting a trap for Amnon. He pretends to have a feast, and he's invited all his brothers to come to the feast. And so he had already given instructions to some of his I guess, men who worked for him, some of his servants. He gave them some instructions and told them, look, when Amnon is drunk with wine, when I give you the indication or give you the word or the signal, I want you to strike him down. I want you to kill him. And so this was a whole setup that Absalom planned to get back at his brother Amnon for what he did to Tamar. Personally, I'm of the opinion that if David had dealt with this situation the moment it happened, Absalom wouldn't have felt the way he did about his brother. You see, he planned this whole revenge because he realized his father did nothing about it. He realized that Amnon got away with this, and he was furious. Yeah, David was angry too, but he did nothing. And so this is an example of what it means to be a good man, but a terrible father. If he had dealt with that situation, if David had dealt with Amnon and dealt with that situation, Absalom might have felt a different way. But instead, Absalom took revenge. He invited Amnon to this feast that he was having, and when Amnon got drunk with wine, he gave the signal, and his servant struck him down and killed him. And yet, we're going to see how David responds to this incident as well. Let's look at it. Look at verse 30 of 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 30. While they were on their way, the report came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, not one of them is left. The king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay down on the ground, and all his attendants stood by with their clothes torn. Now Absalom killed his brother, and then he fled. But see, that's not the end of Absalom. And so Absalom came back, pretended to want to make amends, but came up with a conspiracy to overthrow his father. And so now we see David fleeing his own empire because of his son, Absalom. Another incident of where he was a terrible father. He didn't deal with Amnon, and he didn't deal with Absalom. I wonder what he said to Tamar during all this time. I wonder what was his reaction to Tamar, his daughter. Did he go to visit her? Did he speak to her? Did he try and comfort her? Did he tell her he would deal with the situation? I don't know. I wonder. I'll have to look to see if there's a record of that. But the focus now is on Absalom because now he's taken over the kingdom and David has to run. David has to flee from his own son, the same son he had banished. And so after Absalom took over the kingdom, he was so emboldened that he even had sex with David's concubines on the rooftop where everyone could see. In the sight of where everyone could see. Isn't that something? All of this because of bad fathering. Being a terrible father, not dealing with situations when you should deal with them, not dealing with your kids the way you should, not disciplining your kids when you should. And so David finds himself on the run, and when he returns, his son is having or he got word that his son is having sex with his concubines on the highest place of the temple where everyone can see. You see, all of this is because of what Nathan the prophet prophesied to David. He said, because of what you did with Bathsheba, the sword will never leave your house. He even prophesied that your concubines, someone close to you will have sex with your concubines. That's what he prophesied, that someone close to you would have sex with your concubines where everyone can see. Nathan the prophet prophesied that. And it all came to pass. David never dealt with his sons, never dealt with the situations. And you see, I think because David knew his own faults and his own shortcomings, I think that's probably one of the reasons why he never dealt with the situation. You see, as men, when we discipline our kids, sometimes we get flashbacks of our own faults when we were kids or when we were growing up. We get flashbacks of the mistakes we've made. And as men, sometimes we don't want our kids to make the same mistake, but yet we know in our hearts that in order to help them not to make that mistake, we must discipline them, we must direct them. But David refused to do that. He probably was still busy thinking about what he did, all the mistakes he made. He didn't want to deal with his kids. He didn't want to discipline them. But you see, when you don't discipline kids, they go astray. Discipline is necessary. Fathering is a tough job, but it's necessary. Look at what happened. David's daughter was raped by her brother. His son took over his kingdom and had sex with his concubines on the top of the building where everyone can see. We see in the scriptures that Absalom was eventually killed thanks to Joab. And when he was killed, David cried for Absalom. He cried for him despite the fact that the same guy you flee from, he was trying to kill you and take your kingdom. Yet David cried for him. That's weird. The same son that was trying to kill you, he cried for him. And that's where Joab got angry. He said, you care more about the people who don't care for you. And the people who care for you, you don't check for. See, David he was so partial towards his kids. He couldn't see no wrong in them. And so that's why I say you could be a good man, but a terrible father. Fathering is deliberate. Fathering is necessary. If David had been a father to Amnon and Tamar and Absalom, none of this would have happened. And so we see how important it is to be a father. We see how important fathering is. And it's not just a title, it's a job. It's something we have to do. What do you think? Do you think that David was weak as a father? Do you think if he had corrected his sons, any of this would have happened? Let me know in the comments what you think. And I'll see you next time, right here on this channel.